Okay, so we are on Nun Vov Amud Aleph, and if we can manage it, we'll try to finish the sugya to the bottom, so we can start afresh. But the sugya here focuses for the better part on the words of Reb Meir, because we had a back and forth, which I won't go into all detail. And at the end, we said that we come out like Reb Meir, who is Machmir, and says that the Rabbanon, the rabbis, instituted, I will say, not even a siyag. We're not going to say it's a siyag. We're going to say they instituted a position that midrabanon is as chomor as the raisa. We know in practical sense that midoraisa is, of course, that's the epitome. The Rabbanan created all kinds of protections. I use the word siyag, but all kinds of different things in order for us not to reach the deraisa, because we don't want to get close to the deraisa. So it stands to reason if the rabbis did that, then they did it for protection, but not to say that what they did is bad, is as serious as a deraisa. We know the deraisa is serious, and it could be kares, or it could be whatever it is, malchus, whatever. But the rabbanon should be as serious as deraisa. That's really where the machlokus comes about, and and again, it plays out in our story because we're talking about masa, let's say masa sheni or trumas maser, and we say that masa sheni you have to give it a deraisa, and if you don't, I mean, if you don't give it, then you're over alav. What about Masa Sheni Shel Demai, which is only midrabanan? So there are those say, oh, with Demai we can be more lenient because there's a havamina that he really gave it, but we're not sure. Says Reb Meir, no, Masa Sheni Shel Demai is as serious as Masa Sheni. Why? Because he holds that rabbinic enactment has the same degree of strength. It's as stringent as the other. So again, so that's Reb Meir's theory. So we went back and forth, and last week we came to the point where we were talking about the wholesaler and the retailer, if you remember, and we said that the wholesaler you assume that he didn't give that he didn't give maser, therefore you have to maser, and one of the proofs is that he gives you more than what he sells you. If he's selling you a bushel, he'll give you a bushel and a quarter. Okay, so he's not makbid, so you have enough to take off. And he's an erlich guy, the wholesaler. He doesn't want to cheat you, so he gives you more than what you're buying in order to give maser. Whereas the balabayas, who represents the retailer, he doesn't do that. So there is a havamina much stronger that he gave maser because he's selling you what he's giving you what he sells you. So from that we extrapolated that Rameir was more machmir than Rabban. Okay, so now we're up to Mosef Ravina.
Rabbi, can I interrupt a second? Ask a
Sure.
question. If you had the Rameh and the Rabbanan sitting in front of us today, and you have the fact that the Yom Tov Sheni, the second day of Yom Tov that we observe, is meet the Rabbanan, and it's sort of minhag. It's listed as some of them are for as a minhag, and not to change it. How would that argument go if they were here in front of us today?
Well, first, you made a very good point because Yontif Sheni has the same stringency as Yontif Rishon. I mean, there's no difference between the 2 days. So you see right away that which is a rabbinic enactment has the same chumrah as the deraisa.
The
Okay,
rice?
but you're asking about hetermei rabbana?
No. I'm saying the fact that we have the origin of the Yom Tov Sheni and Golos was according to I remember there's a Tosfos that discusses this, and it was called a minhag, but the Rabbanim instituted it because of the uncertainty of which day it is and so
Right.
on. And it's a minhag that we can't, midrabanan, that we can't change.
Yeah, okay. We don't change it once because the expression is minhag kedin, that once you have a
Right.
minhag, it becomes like a
So,
din. Yeah.
no, I understand that. So if Rameir and Rabbanan
That,
were in
that, that
front
proves
of
Reb
us,
Meir. That proves Reb Meir's point, by the way.
that's what I'm getting at. Is that the reason how basically they go back to Rameir and they use him as a justification when Rabbanan made it a mandatory thing?
That's an interesting thought, and I had not thought about it that way. We went all the way back and looked at the machlokes between Reb Meir and the Chachamim, and therefore we hang our hat on that. I'm not sure, quite honestly. It's something that would be interesting to pursue, which I will take a look at, as to whether or not that swayed them. But remember, the reason, you said it before, the reason for the original Yontif Sheni was the suffix.
Right.
Suffix which day, which doesn't really relate to Reb Meir. It doesn't relate to Reb Meir. Maybe there is some semblance of that, but it's because the uncertainty of the day. So they said, let's just protect it and have it for both days. And then, as we said, it became Minhag Kedin, and we no longer changed it. Can we say that we did that suffix because of Reb Meir's stringency? Because Reb Meir says that a rabbinic enactment has the same power as
because we observe it that way, as if it's a derivation.
You could look at it that way. Whether or not there's a connection is a very interesting question, which I will try to figure out and see where we can find a source for that. But because it is a very interesting question as to whether or not it stems all the way back to that, or irrelevant of the machlokes, the Chachamim created the Yontif Sheni for a reason, which didn't have to do with Reb Meir. It had to do with the question of the time. And then once they did it, they said, you know what? Now that we know already, because we know the Chodesh, we're no longer in suffix for all of these things. But since it was part of the landscape, it was part of the fiber of what Jews had done for years. And we see that today, that there are minhagim that evolved in the centuries past. And I know the Gra and Chazon Ish and others talk about that in terms of, if we did something that was a toyeles, it was a tova, it was a good thing. In other words, we did a good thing, then why should we undo something because we now have a certainty if it was a tova? So obviously something like Yontif Sheni, we consider it to be, in Eretz Yisrael, they have one day and they go about it and it's fine. And we sometimes say, oh, it's an extra burden. It is or it isn't. How you look at it. But, if we didn't have it, we didn't have it. But at the same time, once we created it, it was looked at as a taiva, especially in Chutz La'aretz, where these, where they all lived, the Gra and everybody else. So at that point, we can already say that, it became part of the fiber of Klal Yisrael. And and again, you have Rabbanan who say that when you go to Eretz Yisrael, you shouldn't keep, but in Chutz La'aretz you should, because Avira, the Aretz Machkim, it sort of enhances you if you're in Eretz Yisrael. But once you leave Eretz Yisrael, you lose that kedusha. Again, there's as many as many views as there are poskim. Every posting has a half a day, a whole day. I've heard so many different versions of this question. But to your point, that's an interesting question as to whether or not how did Rabban even think about that, because they were thinking about Reb Meir and his chumrah, and even if it wasn't the direct source, that may have been sort of the nub that got them thinking. So it's something we'll take a look.
Rabbi, there are some kulas for the second day, aren't there, in relation to funerals?
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I'm surprised the Cohen said that.
Yeah.
What, in Chutz La'aretz?
Yes.
Yes.
It used to be, my dad was the expert on it, but it used to be, it's out there that in Europe would be before refrigeration, they would have funerals on the second day of Yontif.
Right. Okay. No, that's correct. But again, yeah. But now
with Goyim doing the work, but it was still still clearly something that you wouldn't do it on the first day Yontif.
Okay. No, I hear that. But again, today I don't think that's the minhag hamakam as much, because we have the wherewithal to wait another day, right? But you're right that there's certain heterim that may apply to Yontif Sheni that we don't have. I remember in the time when my mother was niftar on Shmini Atzeres, Of course, we couldn't do anything, but all the Israelis jumped into action for us and paved the way so that after Simchas Torah, we were able to move fairly smoothly and take my mother to Eretz Yisrael. It would have been, could have done it, but it would have been more of a challenge. But a lot of things were done on Yom Tov Sheni that for us, not for them. They were already out. Okay. So having said that, we're now going to go to the Gemara where Mosif Ravina. I think it's about 12 lines or so, 15 lines. The last word of the line is Mosif. So Ravina is going to ask a kasha now on that which we now concluded that we follow Rav Meir's Chumrah. Okay, and he says as follows. There's a Mishnah which he quotes from Demai, and the Mishnah says as follows. Interesting Mishnah. Halokeach min hanechtom. If someone buys a bread from a baker, and the baker is an amoritz. The baker is not someone who we would say with certainty gives maaser. Then says the Mishnah, maaser min achama al hatzeinenes. You can so you bake bread and it cools down, and you haven't sold it all. Then you bake a fresh batch of bread. The fresh batch of bread may be, let's say today, and the old one was yesterday, or a few hours apart, whatever. You're allowed to give maser from the current hot bread to the cold bread. That's what the Mishnah says. In other words, even though they're different batches, clearly they were not on the same assembly line, you're allowed to do that. And you can also give from yesterday or the previous bread, which is now cold, to the warm bread. Not only that, says the Mishnah, va'afilu midefusim harbe. Defusim is a shape. So what they do, I guess they had shapes. They had long loaves, right, round loaves, different kind of loaves that they made. So it wasn't only one type of loaf, which gives pause that if it's different shapes, it may not be from the same source. In other words, the question here is, what's the source of the baker? Is it one source? Is it multiple sources? Did he get his dough from different places? In other words, all these questions swirl around. But who is the mechaber? Divri Rav Meir. So, okay, now we're going to go into the question, but what does that tell you already? That it seems that Rav Meir has a kula here, right? He's not as makbid if it's demai from Amoritz Nechtam, and you're saying, yeah, yesterday's bread, today's bread, it may be from the same source, it may not. Once you're baking, you may assume everything is from the same source. But if you go from one day to the next, he may have finished one harvest, and then he got to another. Maybe one he gave maser, maybe one he didn't. And we know the halacha is that if you give maser on one batch, if you have the mixed batch and one is maser, one is not, you can't eat it because clearly it's the maser batch is okay, but you mix it with the non-maser batch, it doesn't work. So these are all questions that swirl around this Mishnah, and these are the words of Rav Meir. So now, before we get to the real question, says the Gemara, if you're going to tell me that you can give from the cold bread, meaning the older bread, different lot, to today's warm bread, right? So what are we saying? We're saying, which is better, to have the cold bread or the warm bread? In other words, they may be both as tasty, but what you bake today, that's more choshuv than yesterday. You go to the store and you buy day-old bread. The bread's probably as fresh as anything else, but it has the label of day-old bread. So tzonenes means it's a day old. Is it as choshuv as warm hot bread? No, of course not. People will take the warm hot bread, they'll take the warm pizza out of the oven, and the old pizza that's sitting in the tray that someone made, that he made, which is perfectly fresh, but it's cold. So
we had in the base of Migdash, we had that the lechem upon him, which sat for a week before it was changed on Shabbos, and then the next Shabbos they would change it, and then the Kohen would eat it. And there was I think it was a nasa that it was tasted as fresh as if it had been produced that day.
Right. Right. So you see that again, a week or a day. I mean, it's clearly not the same, but in the eyes of the beholder, fresh is better than not fresh. So what the point he's making here, where you're giving maser from something that is a little bit less chashuv to something that's more chashuv. He says, Kid Rabbi Loi. He hangs his hat on the words of Rabbi Loi that it's okay. Why? The Amar Rabbi Loi, because Rabbi Loi said, Minayin la Torah min haro. He gave a general rule. How do you know that someone can give from the raw, meaning not bad, but the less, let's call it less chashuv. The more chashuv, shetruma say truma, that truma is truma. If you give to the kohen and you give him from yesterday's field that you collected, not from today's, so it may have a slightly fresher tinge to it. It's okay, says Rabbi Loi. Why? Because the pasuk says, "Lo tisu olav chet, meharimchem es chelbo mimenu." Because the Torah tells us in Vayikra, in Bamidbar, when it's talking about the Leviim who give Trumas Maser, they give Truma from their Maser, and it says that there's no chet, there's no sin when you set aside, when you put together as chelbo meaning the best, when you put together the best. So what do we learn from this pasuk? Okay, so the pasuk talks about giving only from the best, what we call the chama, the warm. But we learn from this that you will be chayiv, you will have a chet, if you don't give from the best. In other words, l'chayra, in our case, if you give from the tzina, it won't be as good as the chama. That's what the pasuk seems to implicate. But im eid kadosh, but if there's no kedusha, in other words, if there's no truma or there's no trumas masa here at all, then why do we talk about a chet? You know, it's the old expression, is that I saw lahavdil. I don't want to make this comparison, but I saw a quote from a baseball player, and he said, "They don't boo a bum." In other words, I'm not a bum. You may not like me, but you boo me because I have some chashivas. If I was a bum, you wouldn't care. The pasuk, lahavdil, the pasuk is saying that if it's not kadosh, why do you have a chet? There's only a chet because it's kadosh and you violated the kedusha. So if you give from the inferior, it says you should give from the best. It says you have no chet when you give me chelbo mimenu, the best. But what happens if you give not from the best? Then l'chara you have a chet. But if you have a chet, that means that it's acceptable. You can do it, but it has a chet, right? So says the Gemara, Im Eino Kaddish, if it's not holy, Nisi is chet lama. Why do you even say there's a chet? Why is there a chet if there's no kedusha? The teretz is there's kedusha, but you get a sin because you gave from the less. You gave from the lesser. Mikan Torah says Rabbi Loi. From here we learn that Torah min haro ala yofer shetruma say truma. Therefore, we can say that if you give from the tzina to the chama, it's truma. It may be not the highest degree, and maybe there's a tinge of impropriety, but you've still given truma. So therefore, if that's the case, then that which the Mishnah says by the nechtam in the name of Reb Meir is acceptable. Okay, I can give from the cold to the warm. May not be the best. I may have to answer for it in Shemayim, but I'm not. But it's still kaddish. I still can do it.
So, a question, a thought that comes to mind, and I don't know if anybody talks about this, which is that truma is very different from Meiser and a lot of other things in that there's no set amount. We say 40th, 50th, 60th, but really it's arbitrary,
right.
Possibly
less structured. Yeah.
It's definitely less structured. So maybe the reason why it's okay, even if it's not ideal, called a sort of a b'diavad level of this giving from the not as nice instead of from the nice proportionally, is that since you could give less, it's not where with other things you might say, well, if you have to give it the same type, maybe you should have to give the same value. So if you give stuff that's worth half as much, you'd have to give it twice as much of that. But with truma, that wouldn't apply because there's no absolute minimum or maximum, and so you could get away with not giving as nice because even if you were to say, well, it's volume wise the same as what you should be doing, but it's dollar wise, it's shekel wise, it's a little bit less. In the end, it doesn't matter because truma can be any amount. As long as you designate a certain amount as truma, you're done, even if it's not, not the best in quality, quantity, etc.
Yeah, I hear what you're asking, and it's an interesting question, but let me say this. The Torah doesn't distinguish in the Torah saying that there's a bigger mitzvah to give truma than there is to give meiser. In other words, in Torah, these mitzvahs, all these mitzvahs that we talk about, challah and everything else, is all midaraisa, and it's all on one level. So the Torah is not saying truma has a higher chashivas because of what you say, or you can treat it differently. It's a theory, but at the end of the day, he's hanging his hat on the pasuk in the Torah. The Torah says that you should have that when you give from the best, you won't have a chet. So the Torah means to say that if you give less than the best, you have a chet. Very simply, you have a chet. Truma, maser, everything else. We don't differentiate between who you're giving and the amount that you're giving. I hear your question where you want to theorize that maybe because of the amounts, there should be less of it should be different than Maser, except for the fact that the Torah puts them all on the same level and says that you get a chet if you do it for Truma. We happen to be talking about Truma. But
right, that's the we're happen to be talking about Truma, that's why
but we say that the same applies to Maser and to all the others. So the same chet would apply. In other words, if you did that for the Levi, even though the Levi is technically gets more, right? But he also have to give Trumas Maser. So
right. But what you're saying is that the same rule would apply to Meiser. So if I give the lesser quality 10% for Meiser to the Levi, that would be fine, except I would get a chet, but I would still satisfy the letter of the law.
Exactly. So he wants to challenge the thinking that Rameir is machmer, but we haven't gotten to in other words, this is all prelude to the actual point. So he brings down and he talks about the nechtam, and he says that he understands, because of Rabbi Eloi, he understands why the Mishnah in Demai says that Rameir says that you can switch cold to warm to cold. It doesn't matter. You can do from different shapes. Everything that suggests that there is a kula here, that we're really trying to be makel as much as possible, and that's in the name of Rab Meir. So that's what the Gemara says. Let's go a little weiter, then we'll hit the punchline. But even if you give diffus as the form, in other words, you baked long, you bake round, you baked in a star, you baked challah every which way. L'chayre, they should not be the same. That's the point. Different diffus maybe has a different source of the grain, so therefore there's a different thinking. But no, but since that Mishnah says diffus harbe, that you can do it in different shapes, so the kasha is, let's be afraid that he's going to give maser truma from a chiyuv and a patur. In other words, there'll actually be different batches, and he'll give the maser or the truma from one batch which has been already tithed, and he's going to say, I'm giving it for everything. But the everything means the other batch which hadn't been tithed. So then now you're going to give chiyuv ala patur. That doesn't work. We said earlier, you can't give maser from something that was already masered and say, this is for everything. Because that food, that grain, no longer needed to be tithed. It was already tithed, so there's no chiyuv. The chiyuv is on the untithed portion. So if you're going to give maser from the chiyuv, then you never gave it from the untithed, which means that you didn't do anything. You gave maser twice on one batch and no maser on the other batch. So that's the problem. The problem is and he emphasizes because of the diffus. The diffus means, he doesn't emphasize so much when he says cold bread, warm bread, but he does it with the diffus because the diffus, the appearance suggests that they come from different batches. In other words, one batch he did long loaves, one batch he did round loaves, and because of that, Leichush will be afraid that he gave maser min achiv ala patur, or min patur ala chiyuv, and he gave from the patur to the chiyuv. So in other words, every which way, we're going to have a problem. So, and what do we say? That all of this is acceptable according to Reb Meir. So now the kasha then is, how can Rabbi Yosef earlier came to the conclusion that when it came to redemption, Reb Meir was, remember we said last week that in Reb Meir there's a chilek between redeeming and eating. Redeeming, where he's mekel, we're saying, and eating, he's not mekel. So, but we see for purposes of eating, he's mekel, because if he's going to say you can do all of this, and now you're about to give it to the kohen to the truma, he's going to eat it. That's about eating, not redeeming. And if it's about eating, we're saying that Reb Meir should be machmir, and we see from this Mishnah Demai all the way through that Reb Meir is mekel. So back to the same point. How can you say in Reb Meir that he is that he holds chumrah over the Rabbanon? We see here that from this Mishnah, from all the different aspects of the Mishnah, which we asked, maybe it's the cold on the warm, or maybe it's a different diffus. Every which way, Reb Meir says it's okay. So in other words, he's not worried about giving a maser from the chiyuv to the patur or vice versa. Why not? If it's all midrabanan, why is he not machmir? So that's the kasha here on Reb Meir, or on the thinking here that we gave before Reb Meir, and so we're left with a concern. So, Oma Abaya, interesting answer. Abaya will come to explain what this kasha is. He says it's not a kasha. Rabbi Lezer Shapir ko kasha lei. Rabbi Lezer asked a good kasha. Ushmuel lo Shapir ko mashna lei. But Shmuel didn't give a good answer. We've seen this in other language in different parts of the Gemara of Shas, where the kasha and the teretz don't align. In other words, the kasha may be better than the answer, or vice versa. What does he mean to say here? Okay, so what did Rabbi Lezer do? Rabbi Lezer came along, and he said that he asked a good kasha. What was the kasha from the Mishnah? Because we see from the Mishnah that you can be mekel, and if you can be mekel, then okay. If you can be mekel, why does Reb Meir say you have to be machmir? What does Shmuel answer him? Okay, so Shmuel answers that he gives, what was the example that Shmuel brought? He brought from the Mishnah of giving a get l'medina sayam, right? And we see from there that if you gave a get and the shliach didn't say b'fonei nechtam, but b'fonei nechtam, the magic words that I was there and I saw it written, I saw it signed, then the get is not a good get, and she's an eishes ish, and you could possibly have mamzerus. What are we doing there? There we're being tremendously machmir. So the kasha is, how can you compare when the Mishnah of Demai with what Shmuel is answering? The Mishnah of Demai, which has to do with Safek Maser, that's Ben Adam Lamakom. That has to do with whether or not you get kares, or the Rebbeinu Shalom gives you other penalties. And they're severe, no question. What Shmuel's talking about, and when he answers him, that is as stringent as it gets. You're talking about an eishes ish, a mamzer. How do you equate how do you equate the halacha of, let's say, Kores or the Rabbi Shalom to the halacha of Bnei Adam, where this woman is going to bear a child, it'll be a mamzer. In other words, they don't line up. Rabbi Lezer asks one question. Rabbi Meir says we're being machmir. Where does Shmuel get it from? Because of get. How can you get it from get? Get has a whole different parsha to it, right? You go to Bezdin, the Bezdin has to decree she's a mamzer, he's a mamzer, or if she slept with a man and she was an Eshes Ish, then the Torah tells us that the Api Torah she should be stoned. But you're talking about much more stringent punishments b'dei Adam than the non-giving of Maser b'dei Shemayim. So the teretz here is, Abaye is trying to say that you can't compare one to the other. That which Rabbi Lezer asked is not what Shmuel answered. Shmuel seemed to answer on a whole different plane than Rabbi Lezer, because Rabbi Lezer is asking about a shaila. It seems that Rabbi Meir is machmir midrabanan on things that have to do min hashamayim. Now, do we really know the extent of the punishment b'nei shemayim? I mean, it's Kores. There's nothing simple about Kores, but we know from the Chachamim, we know from that we say, here in the world, that a Misa b'dei Adam is more chomer than Misa b'dei Shemayim. That's what we say. The Rebbe Shalom may have a different cheshbon, but when we look at it, so if the Bezdin institutes a chayiv Misa, that's looked at as much more stringent than just Kores. Again, in our eyes, not in the eyes of Rebbe Shalom. So if that's the case, then Abaye is saying, there's no kasha. Why are you saying there's a kasha from one Mishnah to the other? Forget about it. When Reb Meir is machmir, when it's bidei Adam, when you're talking about Bezdin, you're talking about Misa bidei Adam, and all of those things. Then Reb Meir says that a rabbinic decree is as strong as why? Because the rabbinic decree is preventing the Torah decree, which has such harsh consequences. But if you're only going to have a rabbinic decree that's going to protect you from Misa b'dei Shemayim, it's not okay, but it's not the same. We all understand that it's not the same. So in other words, the kasha here is it's not on a parallel universe to say that that Shmuel is answering Rabbi Lezer's kasha. He's not. That's what Abaye comes to say. And by the way, this spells it out in very distinct terms, but we've seen this in the Gemara before, where the Gemara says Shani Hossam, but that Shani Hossam is a little bit of it's not quite, doesn't have the same clout as the question you're asking. Here, it's a perfectly good answer that there's a distinction between Shemayim, Misa Shemayim, and Misa b'dei Adam, and therefore Reb Meir is machmer on one and not machmer on the other. Clearly, that would be the answer he would give. So Abaye is trying to distinguish and say, don't bring me all these rayas that says that Reb Meir is mekel and on a Rabbanan. And we see before he's machmer on Rabbanan. They're two different worlds. One Rabbanan he can be mekel on because it's b'dei Shemayim, and the other he can be machmer on because it's b'dei Adam. So that's how Abaye wants to explain it. Then the Gemara goes weiter to explain what Abaye is saying. The koshele Rabbi Lezer. Okay, so we just spoke it out. Koshele Rabbi Lezer misa v'yei Shemayim. Because Rabbi Lezer is talking about Misa b'dei Shemayim, he's talking about not giving Maser, which is serious, but it's b'dei Shemayim. We don't punish for that. But Shanle Shmuel, Mrs. Bezdin. And Shmuel answers on a whole different plane. Dilma Shani Mrs. Bezdin, the Chamira. So we're going to select, which we just said, the Mrs. b'dei Bezdin is Chomer. Therefore, we say Reb Meir says 100%. You gotta, it's as stringent as a derisa. So that's the way he wants to answer. Then Rav Sheshes lo shapik hamosavle. So Rav Sheshes, when he's talking about, what does Rav Sheshes ask? Rav Sheshes says that when we talk about, remember the coins. So you can be paida masa sheni of the mai, and you can take silver coins and you can exchange them for copper coins, which is going down in kedusha, right? So we see there that we're makel, because why otherwise would he allow you to take silver coins and use them for copper coins? So then Rav Sheshes, he asks a good kasha. If you're going to tell me on Shmuel that you're talking about something that is b'nei Adam, the Ka'omre inhu Misa, because they were talking about Misa b'nei Adam, Mosav Rav Sheshes, and Rav Sheshes is asking a question from something that has nothing to do with b'nei Adam. Because it says you can't eat maser, but that has nothing to do with Misa b'dei Adam, only b'dei Shema. So in other words, in the content, he's going further in the continuity of the Gemara. What's Rav Shesh's kasha? Why did Rabbi Lezer asked the question? Shmuel gave an answer. Okay, different parsha. Comes Rav Sheshes and he asks on Shmuel, what's the kasha? The kasha has nothing to do with Shmuel. Shmuel is talking about Misa b'dei Adam. And Rav Sheshes is asking a question about Kares, or something has to do with Shemayim. So again, the whole continuity, the Shakla V'Tari of the Gemara, he's saying doesn't pan out, right? You're talking about one Inyan, and I want to talk about another Inyan. So my answer doesn't go to your kasha. So not only is Reb Lezer and Shmuel not on the same page, but even Reb Sheshes, who then asked the kasha on Shmuel, is not on the same page with them either. So again, the Gemara wants to show that this whole continuity is flawed. Okay, L'mai most of Rav Sheshes, and to the kasha of Rav Sheshes, which we just said by the copper coins, Rav Yosef Komashnale. Rav Yosef answered him, and he says, you know what? You're right, but there's a difference between redemption, pidyon, and achila. So that was the next point. The point was that you're right. In redemption, in achila, there's no question that it is astringent, even though it's kares min hashamayim. But we're not talking about achila. We're talking about being podeh. And when it comes to exchanging silver coins for copper coins, you can be podeh. Why shouldn't you be podeh? You're not eating anything. You're just being podeh. And podeh, Reb Meir is going to admit that you're allowed to do. So in other words, the teretz is, I agree with you that when it comes to something with eating, then absolutely we have to be stringent. Even with maser sheni eating, maser sheni, we have to be stringent, even though it's kares. But we're not talking about eating. In his example, we're talking about being podeh from silver to copper, and even though it's a yorida, it's going down in kedusha. That's okay. We're not eating it. So if we're not eating it, Reb Meir's makel that you don't have to be astringent with the Rabbanan as deraisa. So in other words, again, the Gemara is now just laying out for us how this whole discussion between all of these Amoraim came to pass, because we see that originally the kasha didn't meet the teretz, and then when it met the teretz, the kasha on that didn't meet the kasha, and now we're saying, yeah, it all hangs together because of Rabbi Yosef. Rabbi Yosef is sort of the last one to say there's a chilik. But remember, Rabbi Yosef is not the last one. We started our Gemara today with Mosav Ravina. Ravina asked the kasha on Rabbi Yosef. So until Rabbi Yosef, we can justify and say that we're talking about originally we thought we're talking about kares or misa b'dei bezdin, and then we said no because of the chilik that Rabbi Yosef gave, which is kind of the ultimate answer is that everything you said is correct, and Rabbi Meir admits to all that, but he only does so when it comes to consumption, because consumption is a higher degree of chet than redemption. Therefore, by redemption, Rabbi Meir says you're not being machmir, and by consumption, not. Elul Ravina, says the Gemara, but now came Ravina, and he gave a kasha from the nechtam, right, from the baker. Elul Ravina ad the mosiv menechtam he's asking this kasha about the baker and all of the issues so he wants to challenge Reb Meir's chumrah because of what he's saying. Says the Gemara will say the maftir, the palter. Sorry, why does he bring the kasha from the nechtam, which would seem to say that Reb Meir is being makel? Why? Because with the nechtam, we're saying that you can make all these exchanges, right? That's the kasha. L'saya le'mepalter. So let Ravina ask the question not from nechtam. Let it ask him from palter. What did we say about palter? If someone buys from the wholesaler, maser min kol defus ufus, you can give maser from every mold to every mold. Divrei Rab Meir. Why? Because we're saying that with the wholesaler, Rab Meir is going to be makel and say that the onus is on the buyer. So it doesn't matter if he gave maser or not. Let's say he sold the mine, but he sold the mine in enough quantity that everybody in the marketplace knows, don't rely on this wholesaler. He's giving me more than I bought for. Let me give the overage in truma and maser. Divrei Rab Meir. So the kasha here is why, according to Ravina, is he asking a shot? In other words, Rab Meir says we're being a machmir, and here from the nechtam we're seeing that that Divrei Rab Meir we're being makel. Okay, so let him learn it from the defus, from the palter, from the masa mikol defus defus. So according in that situation, you have to give maser from every mold, and you can't rely that one maser from one mold was taken from all of them. So in other words, he's asking the question. Ravina wants to ask a kasha that Reb Meir was machmer. We see from here from the nechtam he wasn't machmer. So the kasha here is, why did Ravina pick the nechtam to ask that question? Why doesn't he ask the question, say the question from palter, from the wholesaler? And from wholesaler, we see that Reb Meir is machmir, right? In order to slug up Reb Meir, Masav Ravina, we have a Mishnah in Demai that says that Reb Meir says you can give freely from cold to warm, from one tefus to another tefus. Therefore, Reb Meir can't be holding that you have to be stringent. That was the kasha. Then we went through this whole discussion here about the back and forth. And we answered, okay, so at the end of the day, Rav Sheshes comes and he says that Rav Yosef asked the proper question. But now, and then Ravina asked the kasha on Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef wanted to talk about the difference between pidyon and achila. So Ravina came and he asked him a kasha. What's the kasha? Don't learn it from Nechton, which is where he was makel, and then it's a good kasha. Learn from Palter, where he's not makel. And Reb Meir shows he's consistent. Just like you have to be consistent by Palter, and you can't rely from one defus to the other, then the same is true. The same is true by Masa Sheni of Demai when it comes to Achila, that he's machmer. Then we have a machmer, a chumrah, and a chumrah, and there's no kasha on Reb Meir. The only kasha on Reb Meir is because he's machmer in one place, and by Nechtom, by the baker, he's not machmer. So, but he's asking, Abai is asking, what do you mean? You're asking it from one Mishnah, ask it from a different Mishnah, and in that Mishnah, Reb Meir is all squared, he's on all fours. He agrees that you have to be machmir. So again, you see from the thinking of the Gemara, sure you could have said the kasha from Nechtom, which would have then been a kasha on Reb Meir. How does he hold in one case you're being machmir, in another case you're not being machmir? And that's a very good question. But the Gemara doesn't want to go in that direction. The Gemara wants to show that no, we want to prop up Reb Meir. That Reb Meir is totally consistent. He's always machmir. He's machmir by achila, but he's also machmir by maser, by demai. So in other words, by achila, which is doraisa, and demai, which is drabanan, in both cases, Reb Meir said you have to be machmir. How do we know? Because by the palter, by the wholesaler, we don't rely on him to say that there's maser from one form to the other, right? And we say Divrei Reb Meir. So we see that he's machmer in all of these. So again, the Gemara really is coming to give us a primer and goes back and forth, and we see the different Manda Omrim. And now we come out to say that no, Reb Meir is completely right, and he's right in Masa Midaraisa, and he's right in Demai Midrabanan, that in both cases you have to be machmer. So what's the conclusion? Elamai is Leila Meimer. So having said everything we've just discussed now, the back and the forth, the kashas, and the kasha, why you look at Reb Meir from one Mishnah and not from another Mishnah. So what does the Gemara say? Palter, Palter mitrei klosa gavim zovin. We say by the palter, by the wholesaler, that he definitely buys from more than one person. But we're not worried because we know he's going to be, the buyer will always be give maser and truma. In other words, we're saying that the palter buys from different people, therefore there definitely is a question of the buy, and therefore everybody gives maser. That's okay. Nachtum, nami mechad gavra huzava. But the nachtum, when we have the havamina, that it's okay because we're having the havamina that he bought from one person, right? So they're two different stories. They're two different cases. One is a case where you make the assumption that demai is not that there was no maser given because the assumption is that a wholesaler buys from anybody who comes. In other words, he buys from farmers. The first batch comes to him, he buys it. The next farmer comes and buys it, and he buys it and buys it. So clearly, if it was one person and he checked the source, okay. But you can't do that for all the farmers that come. A wholesaler is someone who buys from everybody. So therefore, we have to assume that there is demai, and therefore we can say Reb Meir is machmer, because there's almost no way that he gave maser and everything. But by the nechtam, the case of the nechtam, we're not saying that he bought his grain from multiple people. Okay, he bought it from one person. One person came, he bought a grain, and now he starts. Once he finishes totally, maybe he'll buy from someone else, but we're talking about a cold to warm, warm to cold. It's all in one sphere, in one sort of baking. So in one baking, we take the position that he did give maser. So the Reb Meir would be mekel. So in other words, again, it's not a kasha because there's two different circumstances on two different tracks. One where you have to make the assumption that there was demai, and in the other where we're saying with virtual certainty that he gave maser. Therefore, the demai case, which is in the case of the palter, okay, so therefore Reb Meir is machmer, but in the nechtam case, he's not machmer. Okay, so again, we see distinctions in Reb Meir where we can hold like Reb Meir that he's being machmir on a derabanan because there's a valid reason to believe that there's a suffix here. But where there's not a valid reason because I don't know cheskes kashrus or the norm is that the baker doesn't buy from multiple people. And we're talking about maser, not demai, but maser, which is a deraisa. So and the nechtam was a erlich yid. I mean, he was he wasn't a farmer, he wasn't a amoritz. So since he's not an amoritz, and there isn't really the likelihood that he bought it from multiple people, so we give him the chazaka that he gave maser. So therefore, there's two different tracks and two different. So therefore, Ravina's kasha on Reb Meir that there's a stira is not a kasha, because Reb Meir can be totally justified in one case, and in the other case, he can be justified by saying that we're makel because there's all. Now, Reb Meir is not going to be machmer for the sake of being machmer. I'm machmer in one place, therefore I'm going to be machmer in every other place. That's not what Reb Meir is saying. Reb Meir is saying that I'm machmer under the Rabbanim. But where I see with certainty that Masa was given, why should I be machmer? I'm not machmer. I'm saying that it's okay. Therefore, the Mishnah of Nechtam allows it, says Reb Meir. But the Mishnah of Palter doesn't allow it because we are choished. We suspect that the wholesaler did not give trumas. He didn't give truma. Didn't give maser. Or rather, maser here, and therefore the Rabbanan are as stringent as a deraisa would be. And then just to conclude, Rava Amar. So now, Rava, okay, so that's the discussion. Rava has a postscript on Shmuel. Remember, Shmuel brought us the case of a get, mechutz laaretz, that came, and he didn't say b'fonei nechtam, and we say that is a whole different parsha than mitzvahs to the Rabbanu Shloim of Koretz, right? Two different separate things. Rava Amar, Shmuel shaper kamashnalet. But Shmuel was proper when he answered Rav Eliezer that Shem Misa ba'olam, because Misa is a distinguishing factor between the cases. So you're right, Shmuel only wanted to point out that in a case where the Misa is b'dei Adam, that we have a whole different view. It doesn't directly go to slugging up whether a mayor is machmer rabbanan, not machmer rabbanan. That we just answered. We just said that depending on the situation, some cases the mayor says we're stringent, some cases we're not stringent. Shmuel interjected, and he wanted to say that the only discussion, and again, it's kind of a little bit on the side of the discussion of Maser, but that Misa is the denominator between whether or not he's machmir or not machmir. And the meaning that in the case of Misa bidei Adam, he's definitely machmir, and in the case of Misa bidei Shemayim, then he's not as machmir. I mean, we still have to understand our distinction in Reb Meir, but that's what Shmuel meant. Shmuel was talking about the big picture, and in the big picture, he's saying that we're going to make a chiluk between Misa bidei Shemayim and Misa bidei Bezdin. One, Reb Meir can find a kula, which we now see he finds a kula, and in the case of Misa bidei Adam, there are no kulas, and in every case, Reb Meir says that we're machmer, and that's the halacha. The halacha is that it's an aid has to say before an echtam, otherwise the get isn't a valid get, and that's the way we hold, because again by gittin, by things that can produce terrible events, mamza and all this other, and also adultery and all this other things which are terrible chiyuvim, we're machmir, and we say that you have to follow the letter of the law. There's no way around it. All right, so we finished the sugya. Let's take a look at some Rashis. The Rashi. How far did we get in Rashi last week? Okay. Okay. Okay, so the Rashi is about maybe half a dozen lines before the first set of wide lines. I think we were talking there about Mina Nechtam is Am Haaretz. In other words, the Nechtam, the baker, was an Am Haaretz. So therefore the question came is, did he give proper or did he not give proper? So Masa Demai Minachama, Vafilu Mam the Poskin Harbe Ein Hakikoris Dumya Zulazu. Even if he gets it from Defusim Harbe, from a number of different batches, and the loaves are not comparable. The Yeshom Shenechtam Hazer Lokach mikruach shel defus zeh mi'ish echad, v'kikaros shel defus zeh mi'ish acher. So in other words, he bought it from different people in different batches. The Amma Oretz yesh mehem shemasrin. Now, and the Amma Oretz are not all alike. So the first set of circumstances is it was definitely different batches. So we have one issue. And the Amaratzim are not alike, meaning some Amaratzim, v'yesh mehen she'ein masrin, and there are those who will give maser and those who won't give maser. V'shem ezeh lo osher, v'zeh osher. So maybe from one batch he gave maser, and from one batch he didn't give maser. Now mafresh mizeh al zeh hefresh min achiyav al patur, and if he does that, then he's giving maser from something that was not tied to something that was tied, which doesn't work. It has to be like kind, in other words, it has to all be untied. The ain shom maser chalala, and there's no maser chal. The nosem tevel lekoyin, and he's giving tevel to the koyin. Or min apoter alachiyu, or vice versa. He's giving from that which does not require maser anymore, and he's giving it on the chiyuv which requires maser. So he didn't give maser on the chiyuv portion. And again, the koyin is getting tevel. The ain shom maser chalala nimsa she'ein kenegdo. And we find that they're not comparable. That he didn't fix that which wasn't which wasn't comparable. In other words, he didn't do the right thing. So we say that we're not choshid b'demai, right? So then we take the position that no, he didn't buy it from multiple people by Nechtam. Remember, we made the chilik. By Nechtam, we're saying he bought it from one person, by the wholesaler he didn't. So we conclude that the likelihood is, or we're saying as a fact, that the Nechtam bought it from one person. The also chizuk kishal Torah, and he was mechazik min Torah bishloi min hatzanas alachama afapisha chama yafa min hatzanas. And we said, like Rabbi Loy, that even though that the warm is better than the cold bread, loy chashinen to Rabbi Loy. So then we hung our hat on Rabbi Loy, who said that you can give from the inferior to the better, and you're over a lav, but it's still kaddish, and we're only concerned about the kedusha. I mean, you have a lav, that's not good. But is it kaddish? Was it something you could do? The answer is yes, you could do it. It's not going to affect the end result because it's still kaddish, except you're over an alav. From the Kayan standpoint, it's all okay because he's eating tithe food. But from your standpoint, you didn't fulfill the mitzvah of giving from chelboibo, from the better. So therefore, that's on you, but not on the Kayan. All right. So David, you're safe, because you get the goods, and we have to suffer the consequence because we didn't really do it the right way, but we did it, and that's the chilek. In other words, you did it even though it wasn't the right way. Now, by gittin, we can't say the same thing because we want to say, you know what, the get's a good get. Yeah, there was a little bit of an issue, but the get's a good get. The terrorist says it's not a good get. It's not the same as the kayin eating the food, and we are getting the punishment for not the sin because we didn't right. You can't say that by get. Halabai we could, then there wouldn't be a chash of mamzer. But we are so concerned about that we're going to say, if you don't say, you're upending the whole inyan, and that's why we're so much more machmer by eretz and by all these things. Ela middefusim harbe nechers the mamafris min apatur. Kasha logasinan. The Abaya Terutze Komentaritz. So in other words, yes, you can, because Abaya gave a good answer. And what did Abaya say? Abaya said that that they were talking about two different spheres, and the sphere of Trumas and Truma and Maser Sheni and Trumas Maser is a whole different issue. Therefore, you can't ask the kasha on Reb Meir because we're talking about two different planes. One is a Shemayim Kares, and the other is Misa B'dei Adam. Omar Bayer Rabbi Eliezer the Kashale, V'chi also Chizuk Shaper Kashale. Shmuel the Shani, he's recounting what we learned. Shmuel the Shani, Oman Ramehi v'Aisaraya min Hamevi Get. Okay, Lo Shaper Shani Kin Meforish v'Ozl. So the Kashale. Okay, the Kashale the Rabbi Eliezer. Right, but he also chizo betrumas master shaldamai shehen kala shafila truma vadois ena ella b'misa bidei shemayim zor ha'ochla. Again, he's repeating what we said, that there's a distinction. We don't want to be over a lav. It's a lav in the Torah. I mean, how can you be over a lav? So what the Gemara is telling us really is that a lav in the Torah, as bad as it is, doesn't penalize a person the same way as another lav in the Torah. Remember, we have by Shluch HaKan, mitzvah kala, chamura. We don't know what's a kala, what's a chamura. Okay, we understand that. But here, the Gemara is insightful by telling us that there is a chilik in Averis, that some losas says you shouldn't do, and you get kares, which is, again, you can do tshuva, all kinds of things, right? The Rabban Shalom will accept tshuva even on a kares. But when you're over a lav of bezdin, there's no tshuva, right? Certainly in the times of the Torah, if an Eshes Ish was with someone not her husband, she would be killed. The offspring would be a mamzer. That's heavy duty stuff. And there's no tshuva there. So we see that there is a chilik between one lo saseh and another lo saseh. Right? Mishanale Shmuel also chizuk l'divrei be'eshes ish she'isa Torah shebo misa b'dei adam v'hi chamura. So that's why Shmuel came with his answer, and he said, and again, we see at the end that it doesn't affect Reb Meir, because Reb Meir is only talking about on the same plane of whether or not whether or not there's a chiyuv to give maser or not. We're dealing with the heavy duty stuff that Shmuel is talking about. Rav Sheshes is for the Shmuel. Michilol shelo osabo chizuk b'chilol shel demai lo shapa asvei. The hachilol ki lo ovid le shapir lav ba'almahu de lo tuchal lechol. Right? So in other words, again, they're not matching up. One kasha that Rabbi Eliezer gave, Shmuel gives a different answer, and Abaya says they're not alike, and then we get an answer that so comes Rav Sheshes, and he says no, that he's not answering from what Shmuel says, he's answering from what Rabbi Eliezer says, that there is a chiluk in Shemayim, but nevertheless it's not on the same plane. So we have to understand what this whole Gemara is really coming to conclude, which we've said before, that at the end of the day, we're justifying Reb Meir with all of the bells and whistles. We're saying that he is matir in some cases and makel in others, but it's all consistent with whether or not our chashash, our concern is whether or not whether it was demai and masa was given. But it certainly doesn't come to the severity of Shmuel's answer. And so the question at the end was, so what is Shmuel driving a Mack truck into a discussion about demai and maser and everything else, when Shmuel is talking about a whole different parsha? So that was the Rava's answer at the end. The Shmuel Shapar Kamashna, that what shame misa ba'olam, that misa, in other words, misa b'dei adam, is something that Shmuel at the end, he had a havamina that misa b'dei shemayim and misa b'dei adam are the same. In other words, it's misa. You're being punished with death. So Shmuel didn't randomly say, I'm talking about get because I'm talking about misa b'dei adam. Shmuel legitimately thought that that there was no chilik in Shmuel. That Shmuel actually thought that Misa is Misa. Misa b'dei Shemayim, Misa b'dei Adam. So let's take a look. Elamai Yisrael Meimah Mashno the Chayish al Palter Mishum Dematre Tlosa Zavim. Okay, so Nechtem Namid Lo Chayish Le Rameir Lo Tik Shaloch the Kasover Nechtem B'Tok She'ena Lokeach Harbe B'Yachatalin. He's buying from one person because he doesn't buy in the same volume as the wholesaler. So B'Yachatalin L'Meimer Mechad Gavre Zavim. Okay, so we've been able to answer all of these questions, and at the end of the day, Shmuel has a different shita, and Shmuel says that Misa is the Misa is Misa, and therefore he is the outlier to the discussion that we've said here. The halacha, like Rav Meir, clearly. We say that we can paskin like Rav Meir because he distinguishes as to whether or not there's a chashash of maser or not, because we're only talking about b'dei shemayim. And Shmuel, whose havamina was that they were the same b'dei shemayim and b'dei adam, he says you have to be machmir, but it doesn't impact Rav Meir, because clearly Rav Meir would agree that in the case of misa b'dei adam, you're machmir. But Rav Meir doesn't deal with that. Rav Meir only deals with kares b'dei shemayim. So therefore, all of these kashas at Rav Meir are valid, and we have he makes and Rabbi Yosef makes a distinction between eating and redeeming. All of those are valid answers. So therefore, Rav Meir can be justified. Shmuel though talks about something different, and but nevertheless, it's important that we brought Shmuel in, not like. The kasha where we brought down Abaya, who said, "What's going on over here?" Rabbi Lezer's talking about one thing, Shmuel's talking about another thing. The answer is, in Shmuel, it's not another thing. Shmuel actually thought that he holds that Kores and Misa b'dei Adam are the same thing. We don't say that, but that was Shmuel's position. Therefore, Shmuel gave that answer. So Abaya is not 100% correct when he says the kasha and the teretz don't match. They do match, because Shmuel was of the opinion that they are the same thing. So anyway, we finished this sugya, and I think we finished this whole inyan, which was a diversion from what we were talking about before. And next week we'll pick up from the Mishnah. But it's fascinating to see how the first the Mishnah and then the Gemara, all the Amoraim, how they went back and forth to try to either justify or not justify. It's lahavdil. It's, when we go to court and you have one side argues one side and one side argues the other side, and we say that someone who understands the case can argue both sides of the case. How can you argue both sides of the case? It's either guilty or not guilty. You're chayav or potter. But you see from this Gemara how you can switch and understand each side. So what was the other side thinking? But you can see where the differences apply, and where you can hold in one case where Meir says one thing, and in another case he says something else. So in any event, so Mitzvah Shem, we'll pick up next Sunday, right? Cholamayit will all be good. So everybody have a wonderful Yantif, beautiful Sukkos, and Kol Tov.
Yeah, I'm going to be playing hooky next.